Hello, welcome back to BlenderSushi Live Nodding. In this episode, we're gonna try to create this kind of morphing effects on the particles. Um, if you know already in Blender, we have like something called keyed particles. Keyed particle is very interesting because it's a way we can kind of have like a multiple particle source, and then we kind of blend and then keyframe the particles position from one source to the next source to the next source. It's hard to understand unless I think probably I give it a quick demo. So if we have like perhaps like a torus, and then we have like a monkey, and then we have a grid. I'm gonna save this real quick. So for example, for the torus, if I make like particles and then just make it so that it emits at frame 1 on the volume of the torus, and then I'll do the same thing to the monkey. Frame 1, emit all particles, and then just emit it on the volume. And I can actually turn off the particle simulations. And with this guy with the grid, imagine this grid as our like a master source. I also gonna emit 1000 particle at the beginning. Emit from vertices or faces, doesn't matter. Now with this grid particles, if I change it to key, I could kind of add the torus particles and the monkey particles and let it kind of looping. I'll do that real quick. So torus, Suzanne, and then we'll see the effects. Okay, the particles that's kind of moving is actually the grid particles. It's not the torus or the monkey particles, and that's just the grid particles, and it's moving. And then I'll increase the lifetime to 250, for example. You see it start from the torus, and now it's moving to the monkey, and it settled at the monkey. If I add another particles like maybe the icosphere, which is like more rounded, and then add another similar setup, 1000 particles, no simulations. And then with the grid particles, if I add another one, is the icosphere. Now you can see the things kind of moving from one to another based on the lifetime of the particle itself. There are other settings that you can change here, like controlling each particle using time or durations, or just changing the particle system, etc. But they're kind of limited. So I was thinking maybe using Sverchok and Animation Nodes, you can create like a more robust system that does this kind of thing. The idea, of course, here you need the particles need some kind of force that's pulling it, and to a certain shapes, but the shapes can be changing, right? The shapes can be changing from maybe from one like a number into the next number. It's basically just mesh changing. I'll do something like really quick using Animation Nodes and Sverchok. So I'm gonna delete everything, start from scratch, and I'll create a we're gonna do a text, because text is simple and then easy to work with. So with the text, I'm just gonna make it using Animation Nodes, and then I'm gonna use text object output, grab the text, and then the output's gonna be just a frame number. So now the text is changing based on the frame number. Let me quickly turn off always in Animation Nodes and then turn on the rest, so it's a little bit faster. With the text, I can make it float to integer, so it's much simpler. You don't see the fraction number. And then with the changing text, I will also make the frame not changing every frame, but changing every certain tick of. So the way to do it is just use the floor divisions in math and then changes to maybe 100. So every 100 frames, it's gonna tick and it's gonna change the number. So every 100 frames, this 0 will become 1 and become 2. Okay, that seems to be working. And our text need to be a little bit solid as well. So I'll extrude it and make it a bit larger. Okay, we are almost ready with the text. Actually, the text currently is pretty boring. I'm gonna change it to Titan 1, so a little bit thicker. Okay, now this is first. This is the changing text. So the text is always morphing from one to the next one. So we have that setup ready. The text is itself is gonna be needs to be like the force. Okay. Currently, our text objects cannot be like we cannot attach particle force into it because it's not a mesh. I will do a quick remesh, make it smooth, yeah, something like that. And then I'll go to Sverchok, and this one I'll make text to mesh setup. This is important. Grab our object, our text object, and then just output a bmesh mk2. Plug this guy in and plug that guy in. So we have like a intermediate objects right here. We need to enable pose modifier and then also needs to apply the matrix transformation so that it's conforming to the original. Okay, so let's check with the outliner. We have our original text still alive. We can hide it. And we have the alpha objects, which is the intermediate objects. Now this is just a proper mesh from Sverchok, and it's updating in real time. We can turn this guy into force field. And force field, let's change this to surface. This guy, the strength's gonna be -1. It's gonna be like sucking the particles, and the flow needs to be the maximum. More a noise, just add a little bit of noise. I'll show you what's happening next. Now with the particles, there's one type of particles that's I think the most interesting. Apparently, it's not. You cannot use Newtonian. Boids I found is really interesting. Turn off allow flight, allow land. Don't worry about all that. I mean, Boids can behave like a Boids, but if you turn all that off, and then you kind of influence the particles, Boids particles with a force, the particle will actually fly over toward the force and kind of conforming to the position of the points or the surface, which is super interesting. Currently, it's just particles seem to be just fall down the gravity. Maybe I need to turn off the gravity. Now they're behaving just a little bit slow. Maybe I have to turn. I was testing this in another computer, which is a little bit faster. Let me check real quick if this is working. So the particle supposedly kind of being sucked into this shape 0, and after 100 frames, oops, particles seem to be just disappear because lifetime needs to be changed. Lifetime needs to be forever. Our particle simulation, just make it 500, so lifetime 500 as well. Start again. So This force may be a little bit too small. I'll turn it to -5. See, now the void's being sucked by this shape. Perhaps I can turn these shapes into just wire. Now the shapes is changing because of animation nodes, right? And then but the particles voids is kind of alive, and then it's okay, it's understand that the shape's changing, so the voids try to conform into that new shapes, and it's gonna soon it's gonna change into another shape again. There you go, it's become number 2 now. The voids also trying to conform to that shape, so I'll turn off the preview of that intermediate objects. Now suddenly we have this control over particles, just similar to the keyed particles. And this void particles is alive, that it tries to mimics the locations of the shapes, and every 100 frames the shapes is changing into different number, and the voids just try to stick to the surface. And this is really interesting because suddenly you have like a huge potential here. I can make this to 1000, so it's just gonna keep going. It's a bit slow on this MacBook Pro, but you can see here it's a pretty cool setup. Once it hits 500, this is gonna be number 5, and the voids will actually change. But I just realized the particle didn't live long enough, so I'll have to increase the lifetime and then start again. But I can increase the number, maybe not too high, because I tried on a more powerful computer. 5000 voids and Blender start to slow down, so just keep the numbers pretty small, and then yeah, just let's see. So this is starting, void starts to form number 0, and after 100 frame it's become number 1. So it's become number 1, and voids just keep going. And the setup is pretty simple, right? The shapes that's sucking the particles, the force is set to surface. I tried with every points, didn't quite work as well. Only surface seems to be working, and the flow needs to be on. If I turn that off, just the voice just doesn't, just kind of like this run away from it. So strength can be pretty high. You can add a little bit of noise, but yeah, but still this is a pretty basic setup. You can randomize the seed, and the rest of them not so useful, I don't think, but the flow is the most important one. Strength, I'll just make it like around 10 units. But yeah, I found this quite interesting, because what's gonna happen next is with these points we have a big potential. Would be nice if the point is more like the inside of the shapes, like the volume of the shapes, but we can do a little bit more here. If I go back to compositing, go to the node 3, and then with Sverchok I'll make another node 3, and then here I will load the particle. Get selection, post modifier on, and then matrix, don't care, particles, objects, particles, get the particles simulations. There you go, particle system, and then we can do things like closest edges, KD3. This guy might be, I think 1000 is like a safe number in Blender. 1000 is always fast enough, good preview, and you can always increase the particles numbers later just to make it more complex. But I don't like so much dealing with what 1 million particles that I couldn't control, but 1000 particles seems to be a good number, and you can see what's happening without bogging down the Blender. And you see, this is pretty interesting. I'm kind of skipping the number so I have less of this, so we can see what's going on. If the skip number too high, it doesn't create the mesh. Yeah, so we can start again. I can turn off the emitter, shapes, display, only render. Okay, now see we see the particles, and then Sverchok's trying to do it. With the particle, I can actually have less. 500 is good. Okay, now still working. Even it's more interactive, and then this is like, these are the Boids particles trying to make this shape 0, but soon after 100 frames it's gonna change to shape 1, and then so on. This is like a more controllable keyed particles in a way. The shape, you can change it easily with animation nodes. Just pipe in. You can even have any kind of shapes, not just number. This is just an example. Now it's actually already shaping a letter, like a digit 0, and then now it's trying to shape become number 1. Yeah, and then you know the drill. You will see what happening next. In fact, you have so many potential here. You don't just use KD3. Maybe you want to use like metaballs. With metaballs, you have like it's changing shapes of metaballs. Like imagine like the Terminator kind of effects, where you have like a flat metal, and then the metals try to form like a shape of the human, and then it's finally become like a character. So of course, the more details you put into it, the better it's gonna look. Although it's gonna start to bog down the system, and then of course big number is cool, but big number is also, it's just big numbers. It can be boring. It's something you can test. If the big numbers can give like the details that you need for what you're doing, then it's fine, you use that. If you have like a powerful computer system, then if you have a powerful machine and then graphic card, you can pipe in like 10,000, 100,000. But the idea here, even with a small number, you start with a small system, small setup, small numbers, and then you can control these numbers. You can see the things happening interactively. You can still kind of tweak the numbers, and then you can see, okay, that number is controlling that, and then you'll see the result is already quite interesting. And that's actually better for if you're like a technical artist. You want to just work with a small numbers like 1000, 500 to 1000, and then interactive setup is better for you to you kind of learning something more than trying to. If you just use like 1 million and you changing any value, it doesn't give any interactive control, and then that's kind of useless. But if you start small, and of course you will learn more. So here, there you go. It's a morphing text effects using animation nodes and Sverchok because we are kind of, and also we are using Blender Particles here, and the Boids is the perfect particle for this. Of course, you can change the Boids to do other things, like allow it to climb and then fly, climb, all this stuff. That's kind of interact with the surrounding, allowing flight. Maybe the particles will start flying around if we reduce the force. But that's just like additional effects on top of it. But normally, I think for this, I realized that just turning off flight, turning off all this, and then this particle is more controllable than the Newtonian. With the Newtonian, if we try that same force and the Newtonian, these particles will just kind of stick to the surface and then didn't do anything. But with Boids, it's kind of alive, and then, but you see the problem there. The Boids, you can't just change particle system on the fly like that. The Boids needs to be born. Blender needs to know where, when, and when the Boids is gonna start, and then because this is like a simulations, that's kind of the downside a little bit, just a little bit of downside. But other than that, Boids and force seems to work really well. And this is only, we are only using a simple force like a surface force, but it's really powerful. If you try other force like a smoke, turbulence curve, and you'll see that there's a lot of potential here. So the idea is maybe here I'm trying to incorporating Blender particles more into Sverchok and animation nodes, and yeah, it's really powerful. Gonna continue the simulations. If we change the, if we go to animation nodes and then change the text from whatever it is currently, so it's now trying to form letter 0, but really slowly because we have animation nodes here. I can just cut this and then just change this to letter B, for example. This guy gonna change shape into letter B. Very slowly. Maybe because I'm recording, but anyhow, it's something you can try. This is still the basics. If you have any comments, you can leave it down below, and then yeah, I'll see you in the next live noding.